Jake Thompson had only lived in Silver Pines for 3 days before trouble knocked. Literally. It was just after 9:00 p.m. when the sharp raps echoed through the quiet house. He glanced up from his open laptop, instinctively lowering the screen. The knock came again. 4 quick, deliberate hits, followed by silence. Not the kind of knock a neighbor used. This was trained. Tactical. Jake moved quietly to the door, peering through the peephole. 2 men stood outside in dark tactical pants and black windbreakers, with cheap-looking HOA enforcement patches hastily stitched on. One had aviators on, at night. The other adjusted what looked like a fake radio mic clipped to his collar. Jake's gut tightened. He opened the door just enough to appear cooperative, but kept his body angled, hidden behind the reinforced frame. "Mr. Thompson?" the taller one asked, flipping a small silver badge that looked like it came from a vending machine. "That's me," Jake replied, his voice calm. "We're with the Silver Pines HOA Special Enforcement Division," said the other, his tone clipped, official sounding. "We've received reports of multiple violations on your property. Grass length exceeding regulation, a garden hose left uncoiled," and he leaned in slightly, "a non-conforming mailbox." Jake blinked. A non-conforming mailbox. The man pulled a laminated HOA ordinance sheet from a folder and pointed. Section 8.32. No mailboxes shall feature curves or custom paintwork. Yours is quite decorative. Jake fought the urge to laugh. "I bought the house like that." "That doesn't make it compliant," the taller one replied. "We're here to serve you with a citation and issue a warning." "Funny," Jake said, reaching slowly into his pocket and pulling out his phone. "I just checked the HOA site last night. Didn't see any Special Enforcement Division listed." The 2 men exchanged a glance. "We're newly authorized," the short one said quickly. "Pilot program. You'll be seeing more of us around." "Oh, I bet," Jake muttered, now openly recording. "You need to correct the violations within 48 hours, or you'll be subject to further action. Possibly detainment." The tall one leaned forward again. "This is your only warning." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Detainment? For a mailbox?" The man's expression didn't change. "We suggest you take it seriously. You don't want to make us come back." The 2 turned and walked back to their black SUV parked across the street. No decals, no license plates. As they pulled away, Jake noted the SUV's taillights, faint flickers of tampered electronics, possibly a surveillance uplink. Jake shut the door and locked it, then stood in silence. His fingers moved instinctively, restarting his laptop, launching an encrypted program he hadn't touched since his last undercover assignment with the Bureau. He wasn't on duty anymore, but old habits never died. The men weren't HOA. They were something else, and they had no idea who they were messing with. Jake cracked his knuckles and whispered to himself, "Let's see what game you're playing." By the end of the week, the entire neighborhood had changed. It wasn't just Jake's strange encounter anymore. One by one, Silver Pines residents began sharing quiet stories. At first whispered over fences, then traded like currency in online forums no one wanted to admit existed. Jake watched the tension grow like a crack in a dam. Mr. Alvarez, a retired schoolteacher, was fined $300 for an unauthorized wind chime. He said the men came into his backyard without knocking. Mrs. Carmichael down the street said they threatened to tow her car because the bumper had a non-HOA-approved decal, a bumper sticker that read "Proud Grandma." Jake listened, observed. His FBI instincts told him this wasn't random enforcement. It was psychological conditioning. The fake enforcers weren't punishing rule breakers. They were testing the boundaries of fear. It was working. Children stopped playing outside. Porch lights stayed off at night. Residents pulled their blinds down when SUVs slowly cruised by, their tinted windows reflecting nothing but paranoia. Jake noticed other things, subtle but calculated. Every home security camera on his block mysteriously went offline for 2 hours one night. All at once, residents received emails from a spoofed HOA security update, urging them to disable systems to prevent interference with the neighborhood monitoring network. It sounded absurd, but people complied. Jake didn't. He walked the block at night, silent as a shadow, wearing thermal goggles and scanning for signal emissions. He picked up 3 frequencies, none local, none public, all encrypted. He couldn't break them yet, but he could trace the source. It always led back to the same SUV. And that SUV was always parked near the same 2 houses, both recently bought, both supposedly vacant, but Jake had seen shadows moving behind the curtains. Lights turned on without timers. Trash cans filled with food wrappers. Someone was living there and watching. Jake decided to test them. The next morning, he dragged a large plastic flamingo lawn ornament out onto his front yard. Bright pink, offensively tacky, and definitely against HOA aesthetic guidelines. He left it dead center on the lawn. 30 minutes later, they came. Same black SUV. Same men in dark gear. Jake filmed them from behind a curtain as they snapped photos of the flamingo, took notes, and even circled his home on foot. When they reached his back gate and tried the latch, Jake triggered the alarm remotely. A loud screech split the silence. They froze, looked up at the camera Jake had reinstalled last night, one they hadn't spotted, one they couldn't jam. They walked away fast, but not before one of them looked directly at the lens. Smiled. Jake paused the footage and zoomed in. The man was wearing an earpiece, and stitched onto his collar was a patch Jake hadn't noticed before. A black house silhouette inside a red triangle. That symbol wasn't from any HOA. Jake stared at the screen and whispered, "This is bigger than code violations." Jake knew better than to confront something he didn't fully understand. These weren't ordinary scammers or neighborhood bullies. This was a system, methodical, careful, and cloaked in authority. But if they wanted a silent war, they'd get one. He reactivated his field kit. Inside a false wall panel in his closet, Jake unpacked what he promised to never use again: miniature thermal cameras, encrypted recorders, a scrambler drone the Bureau still thought was lost in a warehouse fire. He wired motion sensors into his eaves and disguised pinhole cameras in the bird feeders. Silver Pines became a chessboard, and Jake intended to play 10 moves ahead. At 2:14 a.m., the motion sensors blinked red. 2 figures approached his house from opposite angles, one flanking the backyard, the other near the front hedges. Both wore black and moved like professionals, silent, efficient, not amateurs, not neighbors, trained. Jake sat in darkness, watching every step from the basement monitor bank he'd hastily assembled. The man near the front paused, then raised what looked like a signal jammer. Smart, Jake thought, but not smart enough. He'd hardwired the system, old school. No Wi-Fi, no gaps. From inside the basement, Jake remotely activated the sprinkler system, calibrated to a pressure far higher than legal. A geyser erupted near the backyard intruder, blasting him into the bushes. The second man near the front dove for cover as lights on Jake's property suddenly flared on. But no alarm. Jake didn't want them to run. He wanted them to think he hadn't noticed. Both retreated. Fast. Jake leaned back, breathing slow, adrenaline steady. They were probing his defenses now, testing response times, looking for weaknesses. But what unnerved him most was what he found in the morning. On his doorstep, left under a decorative rock, was a printed citation: HOA violation, unauthorized use of water during off hours. Beneath it was a second note, handwritten: "You're clever, Mr. Thompson. But so are we." Jake stared at it for a long time. By noon, the neighborhood was fully under siege. HOA enforcers walked the streets in coordinated pairs, scanning yards, peering through windows, documenting everything with tablet devices. A neighbor across the street, Maya, a single mother, was stopped and questioned for walking her dog without a leash. Jake watched through binoculars as they surrounded her, with thinly veiled threats about non-compliance audits. He wanted to intervene. Every muscle in him said go. But he couldn't blow cover. Not yet. Instead, he reviewed last night's footage frame by frame. And there it was. A small logo on one man's belt. A black house inside a red triangle. Jake ran it through every database he had access to. Nothing. No matches. No corporate registration. No military insignia. Not even a private security firm. That's when the pieces clicked. These men weren't just operating outside the HOA. They were operating outside the law. And Jake realized this wasn't about neighborhood control anymore. It was a cover for something much larger. Jake knew he couldn't take them head on. Not yet. Not without knowing who they were. These men were trained, equipped, and protected by a structure he hadn't fully uncovered. But he could provoke them, push them into making a mistake. So he decided to bait the trap. That morning, Jake made a show of defiance. He wheeled a massive gas grill into the front yard and fired it up under the no open flames outside designated zones rule. Then he hung 3 banners off his porch railing, bright, unapproved colors. On the lawn, he positioned the flamingo from earlier and added 5 more, each one worse than the last. He even played classic rock over exterior speakers, loud enough to turn heads but not quite loud enough to legally breach HOA noise regulations. It worked. At precisely 1:12 p.m., the black SUV rolled up. Jake didn't move. He sat calmly in a folding chair on the lawn, sunglasses on, iced tea in hand. When the 2 enforcers stepped out, clipboard in hand, Jake gave them a lazy wave. "Afternoon, boys. Grilling season's here early." The taller one didn't smile. "You are in violation of 6 HOA articles, Section 5 through 8. This is your final warning." Jake sipped his tea. "You always make threats on clipboard paper." The shorter one stepped forward. "Refusal to comply will result in forced correction and temporary detainment under subsection 8.4. Jake stood slowly and tilted his head. "Subsection 8.4 doesn't exist," he said flatly. A tense pause. The taller man's jaw clenched. "It does now." There it was. Confirmation. They were making up rules as they went, and didn't care who noticed. They were used to fear, to submission. But Jake wasn't playing along. Instead, he stepped back and held out his hands. "Then by all means, detain me." The 2 fake officers looked surprised. The shorter one even hesitated. "Seriously," Jake added, "I'll go peacefully." They moved fast, trying to cuff him on the spot. The moment the cuffs clicked around one wrist, Jake twisted and triggered the signal. Subtle pressure against the metal band activated a micro-transmitter sewn into his waistband. A silent beacon. FBI tactical protocols called it Phase 0, a preemptive mark for tracking and response. If his old tech still worked, a signal had just gone out across a closed bureau channel. Jake allowed them to force him into the SUV. Inside, the windows were blacked out, the air thick with sterilized plastic and faint bleach. No license plates, no in-car GPS. The rear doors sealed from the inside. But Jake wasn't worried. The van had an old-school undercarriage, perfect for magnetic tagging. A tracker was already in place, sending pings to an encrypted endpoint he'd set up 2 nights ago. They thought they were taking him away for punishment. They didn't realize they were walking into his net. Jake leaned back in the seat, cracked a small smile, and whispered, "Got you." The SUV rumbled through Silver Pines, its tires humming against the smooth asphalt. Jake sat in the back, his hands loosely cuffed in front of him, his mind working like clockwork. Every second they spent driving was a moment his tracker was leading the FBI straight to him. They wouldn't be long. The enforcers didn't speak. The silence between them was thick with anticipation, as if they expected Jake to beg or plead. But Jake remained still, watching the road ahead as the landscape blurred into a monotony of tree-lined streets and empty lots. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. Nothing suspicious. Yet, he could feel it in the air, the tension that always existed before the storm broke. The enforcers were testing him, trying to provoke a reaction. They didn't know who they were dealing with. 5 minutes later, the SUV slowed and turned off the main road, heading toward a more secluded part of town. Jake felt the familiar pull of the trap snapping into place. He recognized the pattern. Empty buildings, a dead zone for communications, a place where the real operation had to be hidden. The SUV pulled into an industrial lot, its entrance guarded by tall iron gates that slowly creaked open. Inside, there were no other vehicles, no signs of activity, just a collection of warehouses and steel structures, abandoned but clearly monitored. Jake felt the faintest tremor in his bones. This was it. The doors swung open, and the taller enforcer gestured for Jake to exit first. Jake did so without resistance, his posture relaxed, almost too calm. As the two men pushed him toward one of the warehouses, Jake's mind calculated the odds. They were confident. Too confident. They don't know what's coming. They brought him inside, into a large, open space where high steel beams crisscrossed overhead. The walls were bare, and the air smelled of rust and stale metal. The only sound was the heavy breathing of the enforcers as they began to circle him, keeping a safe distance. "You're more trouble than we anticipated, Thompson," the taller enforcer said, his voice low and menacing. "But we're in control now. This ends today." Jake didn't respond. Instead, he focused on the buzzing sound that had started to filter through the walls, the subtle hum of an incoming signal. He knew it wasn't from any device they had planted. This was his FBI team, moving in. As the enforcers moved closer, Jake's instincts took over. He twisted in one fluid motion, ducking under a half-hearted grab from the shorter man. His cuffed hands hit the ground in a precise, sharp motion, triggering a hidden device in his shoe that emitted a burst of static. Suddenly, the whole room lit up. Lights flickered, the air vibrated with a sharp hum, and the faint sound of heavy boots thundering toward him filled the room. Before the enforcers could react, the warehouse doors burst open, and a team of FBI agents stormed in, guns drawn, shouting commands. "FBI, don't move." The enforcers froze, their eyes darting between Jake and the agents pouring into the space. Jake stood tall, now fully aware of the chaos unfolding around him. He ripped the cuffs off his wrists, the small device he had activated dissolving them instantly. His fingers brushed the cold metal of his own FBI badge, a symbol they hadn't seen yet. "You thought you could play this game with me," Jake said, his voice steady, eyes locking on the two men who had underestimated him. "But you're the ones who just got caught." The tension in the air cracked like thunder. The taller enforcer sneered. "You think this is over? You have no idea who you're dealing with." Jake stepped forward, his hand now on his gun. "Oh, I know exactly who I'm dealing with." And with that, the enforcers knew. There was no escape. The game was up. The moment the enforcers were handcuffed and loaded into the back of an FBI van, the adrenaline began to wear off. Jake could feel the weight of everything pressing down on him. His FBI team, led by Agent Rowan, moved fast, securing the warehouse and confiscating every device, every piece of evidence that could tie the operation together. But something gnawed at the back of Jake's mind. Agent Rowan walked over, her expression tight but professional. "You did good, Jake. We've got them. They'll talk." Jake didn't respond immediately. His eyes scanned the warehouse as if searching for something he'd missed. His gut told him this was just a small piece of a much larger puzzle. "They're not the endgame," Jake muttered under his breath. Rowan raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Jake turned to face her. "The enforcers. They're too well organized, too well funded for a petty HOA scheme. They were pushing an agenda, testing residents, seeing how far they could stretch the boundaries of fear and control. Rowan nodded, but her eyes betrayed her doubt. It's an HOA operation. They were using fear to gain compliance. There's a lot of money in property values. But what's your theory? Jake paused. This is bigger. They're part of something else. I'm not just talking about some rogue HOA group. These men, these agents, they are connected to something dark. They're operating above the law. Something clandestine. Rowan's expression hardened. You think they're working for someone else? Jake nodded, his eyes narrowing. Someone pulling the strings. Someone who wanted to test society's willingness to comply under duress. Someone who can afford to run these kinds of operations undetected. Rowan studied him carefully. And you think this all leads back to Silver Pines? No, it's bigger than that, Jake said, tapping his head. I've been running surveillance for years. And the thing that bothers me most, those symbols. The red triangle and black house. It's a brand, Rowan. But it's not one I've seen before. It's not just for the HOA. It's part of a covered operation. A black ops group, maybe. Or something funded by powerful backers. Rowan stepped back, thinking it over. Then her eyes locked onto his. So what's the next move? Jake didn't hesitate. I need to track the source of those communications. The jammers. They were too clean. Too effective. This operation's not just in Silver Pines. It's nationwide. We can't wait for them to slip up again. We need to find out who's pulling the strings before they realize we're onto them. Rowan nodded and gave a sharp order to one of the agents. Get the tech team working on those communications. We're not letting this slip through the cracks. As the agents worked, Jake's eyes lingered on the now empty enforcer van. His mind raced, processing everything that had just happened. They'd caught 2 low-level agents, but there were others out there, hidden, waiting for the right moment to strike. A few minutes later, Rowan returned, a grim look on her face. Jake, you're not going to like this, she said, holding up a folder. We've been monitoring other towns across the state. There's been a pattern. HOA enforcement teams, same tactics, same symbols, same protocols, only they're getting bolder. The pressure's mounting. Jake's stomach twisted. How bad is it? Rowan met his gaze. Worse than you think. It's spreading. Fast. Jake took a deep breath. We need to get ahead of them. The walls of the FBI's temporary command center buzzed with activity, but Jake's mind was miles away. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together, but with each turn, the picture became more disturbing. Rowan sat beside him, reviewing data feeds as agents in the background scrambled to sift through the mountains of seized documents and encrypted files. The symbols Jake had spotted on the enforcers' uniforms, the black house inside the red triangle, kept repeating in his mind. This was no isolated operation. It was a methodical campaign, a test of public compliance that stretched across multiple towns and cities. We've been tracking their communication networks, Rowan said, her voice steady but tense. And I think you're right. This isn't just an HOA scheme. There's a coordinated effort, with layers upon layers of secrecy. These enforcers, they're disposable. The real operation is far more intricate. Jake turned to her, his expression hardening. Who's behind it? Rowan hesitated, then pushed a new folder across the table to him. We found a name. An alias. Drake Jensen. Jake's eyes widened. The name meant nothing to him at first, but the more he thought about it, the more it stirred something deep in his gut. Jensen. That name was tied to a shadowy group, a private contractor who'd worked with international intelligence agencies in the past. A ghost. No records, no ties, just an operation that seemed to exist beyond the reach of law enforcement. Rowan saw the recognition on his face. You've heard of him. Everyone has, Jake replied, his voice dark. But it's all rumors. Nothing concrete. Jensen has been linked to covert military operations, espionage, destabilizing governments. But no one's ever caught him. No one knows where he is or what he's really doing. Rowan leaned in, her eyes narrowed. Well, apparently, he's running this entire operation. And it's not just some rogue mission. We've linked multiple cities to a network of operations funded by off-the-books resources. Jake's mind was racing. The HOA, it was just a front. They were never interested in property values. This was about testing control, manipulating public compliance, seeing how far they could push without sparking an uprising. And now they've gone nationwide. Rowan paused, tapping a few keys on her tablet. The real danger is they're using these HOA enforcers to gather data. They're pulling intel on how people react to fear tactics, how far they can push before resistance forms. And the most chilling part, the simulations we found. They're already running trials on more aggressive methods. They want to weaponize fear. Jake's mind flashed to the residents of Silver Pines, how they'd been manipulated into silence. The tension, the paranoia. People were terrified, not just of the enforcers, but of what they might be capable of. If this reached the wrong hands. He stood abruptly, the intensity in his voice now unmistakable. We have to stop them before this goes any further. If they're testing compliance, they won't hesitate to escalate. If they succeed here, there's nothing stopping them from doing it on a larger scale. They'll have a blueprint to control entire populations. Rowan stood with him, her expression resolute. Then we make them talk. We bring down Jensen and expose this before it spreads. Jake gave a grim nod. I need a location. I need to know where they're operating from. Rowan's eyes flicked to the screen. We're tracing every signal, every lead we have. But it's slow. Jensen is a ghost. He's always 2 steps ahead. Jake's voice dropped, a glint of resolve in his eyes. Then we make it 3 steps. The moon hung low in the sky as Jake and Rowan approached the abandoned facility on the outskirts of the city. The location had come through a combination of signals intercepted from the fake enforcers and a long shot from a satellite sweep. It was a warehouse, hidden deep within an industrial park, far from prying eyes. The heavy metallic doors stood ominously in front of them as Jake surveyed the surroundings. It wasn't just a warehouse, it was a fortress in disguise. Armed guards were stationed at every corner, their presence masked by the unassuming nature of the place. The kind of security that screamed this is no ordinary operation. Jake's pulse quickened, but he remained calm. We go in fast and quiet, he whispered to Rowan, who gave a sharp nod. They were ready. Their team was just outside the perimeter, waiting for the go-ahead. But Jake knew that this would be a fight of wits as much as force. The man they were after, Drake Jensen, had played a long game, so Jake would need to be ready for anything. Inside, the building was eerily silent. The few lights that flickered in the distance only illuminated the shadows, creating an air of tension that clawed at Jake's nerves. His every step was calculated, his gun raised and ready, while Rowan kept watch over their 6. They moved like shadows through the hallways, avoiding security cameras and sidestepping guards who seemed almost hypnotized by their routines. No one was aware that the storm was coming. Then they found it, the heart of the operation. A massive control room lay ahead, walls covered with monitors, each displaying different parts of the country where the HOA enforcers were active. In the center of the room stood a tall figure, his back to them as he studied the screens. It was Drake Jensen. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The man was every bit the shadowy figure Jake had imagined, calculating, cold, and ruthless. But Jake knew this wasn't just about a criminal anymore. This was a battle for the future of control and freedom. Jensen had to be stopped. Jensen turned slowly, his eyes locking onto Jake's with a chilling calmness. I was wondering when you'd show up. Rowan raised her gun, but Jake put his hand on her arm. Let me handle this. Jake stepped forward, his voice unwavering. You were testing society, Jensen, pushing them to see how far you could stretch their compliance, how much fear you could instill before resistance formed. And now you've reached the point where you're ready to weaponize it. To control everything. Jensen smirked, his eyes glinting. That's the point, Thompson. Control is everything. Fear is the ultimate tool. And now, I have the blueprint for manipulating entire populations. Governments, corporations. They're next. I'll reshape the world, one city at a time. Jake's heart pounded. You won't get the chance. With a swift motion, he grabbed a nearby wire, slamming it into the power grid, sending a shock through the control room. The lights flickered, and Jensen's expression twisted into one of fury. He reached for his gun, but before he could draw it, Rowan fired, hitting him in the shoulder. He collapsed to the ground, eyes wide with disbelief. You think this is over? You don't understand. Jake crouched down, locking eyes with the defeated mastermind. No, you don't understand. We stopped you. The sound of sirens grew louder outside as the FBI team stormed the building, securing the rest of the operation. The enforcers, the equipment, the entire Black Ops network. They were all being dismantled. But Jake wasn't satisfied. This fight wasn't just about one man. It was about sending a message to anyone who would try to manipulate the system again. You won't be the last, Jensen sneered, but there was no more power in his words. Jake stood, his back straight, as Rowan approached, her expression one of relief. Is it over? She asked quietly. Jake looked out over the room, the broken pieces of Jensen's empire scattered across the monitors. For now, he said, the weight of the battle finally lifting. But we'll always be watching.